This is the fall 2022 Duke Center on Addiction and Behavior Change seminar series. I'm Ed Levin, director of the center, and I want to thank Colleen Bauer from DIBS for helping bring this all together on the technical side. And first, I wanted to just make a couple announcements. Here on the screen is the seminar series for the fall. So I'll be giving the talk today, and then we're going to reconvene on the Thursday, October 6th at 2 o'clock. Dr. Katie Healy from the psychiatry department is going to talk about the long hangover, persistent neurologic and behavioral effects of adolescent intermittent ethanol exposure. And then on the 19th, Dr. Amir Rizvani, on the faculty professor in the psychiatry department, is going to be giving his talk on a very practical thing. I mean, he's certainly done a lot of outstanding research here at Duke and previously at UNC, but he's also very active in terms of teaching. So he's going to talk about his experiences teaching undergraduate students about drug abuse, and he's currently teaching 2 courses to Duke freshmen about that. Now, this is just an announcement. It's not officially a CABC event, but I put it on the schedule because it's really a very important series. TK Lee lecture. TK Lee was the director of the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism for many years, and then came here to Duke as a professor and really helped us put the CABC together and to advance addiction research and science here at Duke. And he has unfortunately passed away, but has endowed the lecture series, and that's hosted by the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. So this is a different time. It's a Thursday at noon, and it'll be hosted by the Psychiatry Department, and I'll send out the link as the time approaches. And then we're going to have co-sponsored 2 co-sponsored seminars with the Center on the Study of Adolescent Risk and Resilience at the later part of the semester on November 17th and December 1st, having Meredith Adicott, who used to be here at Duke as a postdoc and now is a faculty member at Wake Forest University. She'll be talking about smoking and smoking cessation and stress and cognition and epigenetics, DNA methylation. And then Elizabeth Lippard, who used to be at UNC and is now a faculty member at University of Texas, will be finishing things up in December 1st. And then just to let you know, I am putting together the spring 2023, believe it or not, 2023 is coming up, seminar series for CABC. And please let me know if you'd like to speak or if you have a suggestion for a speaker. I'll collect all of those, and then we'll put together a series to continue on in the spring. And so with that, I sent out to the group Emily Rissman from North Carolina State University is having a seminar series as well, and so please attend to that, and that is available live or on Zoom. And her first one is going to be on alcohol addiction and research. So in any case, let me now share my talk, which is here, I think. Okay, so now I gave it away. Okay, so today, and let me know if there's any problems seeing it, but I assume everybody sees it okay. Boosting nicotine replacement efficacy with monoaminergic co-treatment. So I'm going to talk about decades worth of research that we've done here at Duke University with numerous co-investigators and colleagues, and bringing together kind of the complex reality of how addiction, and in this case, tobacco addiction, is involved with neural networks, and it's not just nicotine or nicotinic receptors, not just dopamine and dopaminergic receptors, but a far more complex environment or context of the of neural systems, which makes things challenging, but also presents a lot of opportunities for therapeutics. So I want to thank my collaborators, Andrew Hockey, Brandon Hall, Corey Wells is a really top-notch tech who's carrying it on right now, and a variety of other students and faculty members, Amir Razvani, who is tuned in here too, and Andrew just got a faculty position after being a postdoc here, and I congratulate him for that, carrying on drug abuse and neurotox work in the Chicago area, and the variety of funding sources from the government, from industry sources, from foundations have supported this work. So I want to emphasize this community aspect. I mean, certainly we all live in a community of people, but between our ears is a community of neurons and neural systems and glial systems, and they participate in the addictive process. So this is just a little kind of jokey thing, but I think the metaphor is useful. As downtown dopamine is greater metropolitan area, so this is just taken off from this old New Yorker. This is from many years ago, back when I graduated from college, that they had the New Yorker's view of the world, and it stopped at the Hudson River and just kind of glossed over the rest of the U.S. and onto the Pacific and the rest of the world. So it's tempting, whatever we're studying, for us to think is the center of the universe. I do a lot of nicotine work. I think of nicotinic receptors and how things are related to that. But basically, and people who are studying serotonergic systems are studying that and think that's the center of the universe. So it's good to kind of step back and just recognize our own local bias, and that it's really part of a larger context. And this downtown dopamine. So this is just scoping out from the downtown area. Oh, no, it's not just downtown. It's the whole Manhattan Island, but that's really an old-fashioned idea here with this old-fashioned picture. There's the 5 boroughs, that there's the metropolitan tri-state area, there's North America, there's the world. So the fact is that we have a much broader context, and tobacco addiction does involve more than nicotinic acetylcholine systems, more than dopamine systems. As important as dopamine systems are, and they are quite central to drug reinforcement and addictive processes, and particularly, the ventral tegmental to nucleus accumbens dopamine projection. But there are other areas that are involved, and this has long been recognized that the brain is an organ of communication, and so that here, even at its most elementary level, in terms of a neuron, it's what's the neuron do? It's branched out and connecting to and receiving from other neurons and glia around it, and humoral effects. And so one kind of elementary way of looking at it is as circuits, and again, we need to recognize that that's just a metaphor, and it's not like electrical circuits that we think about, even simple circuits that run through our house, or even much more complex circuits that are in the computers that we use. That those are still very primitive compared to the multi information flow going on in our brains, in terms of, it's not just this is connected to that, is connected to that. Sometimes I think that the big flaw in our conceptualization of how the brain works or how physiology works are boxes and arrows. I mean, we can make very complex diagrams with boxes and arrows, but that's not how it works. That's one way of approaching how it thinks, but it's not that well defined in terms of this causes that, causes that, causes that. There's really much more subtle things going on, and probabilities that things will cause something else or not. But just as an approach to it, I mean, we can't just throw up our hands and say, oh, well, it's very, very complex. How can we ever understand it? And we only have a brain to understand it with, so we'll never completely understand the brain and still be able to breathe. But we can approach it. I mean, we can make progress. And so one step in that direction is recognizing there's a variety of different neural systems involved, and you know, I'm a behavioral pharmacologist at heart, so I think about things in terms of neurotransmitter receptors, and neurotransmitters, certainly acetylcholine nicotinic receptors are involved. Muscarinic acetylcholine receptors are involved as well. Dopamine, D1, and to some degree D2, but you know, we've done quite a bit of work and other people have too, and it seems like the D1 are much more intimately involved with drug reinforcement as opposed to D2 type of receptors. Serotonergic receptors, of which there are a plethora, 17 or more different kinds, and they only have subscripts, but subscripts of subscripts. The 2C is one that 5-HT2C. Serotonergic receptors is one type that we've looked at and found to be involved with nicotine reinforcement. And then there's the forgotten amine, monoamine. Usually you think about the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine as the monoaminergic transmitters, but histamine is also that. And it's not, histamine is important not only in terms of the, you know, your nasal passages and seasonal allergies and using antihistamines, but histamine is an important neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. And we've done some work with histamine H1 receptors and their role in reinforcement. And then norepinephrine as well. We've done a bit of work with that. And well, I know the title of the talk was monoamines. This is not a monoamine, but glutamate, we've done some work, is particularly the NMDA, ligand-gated ion channel, subtype of glutamate receptor that seems to be involved. And that's actually, you know, newly famous. It's been known for a long time, but in terms of the recent flurry of work with ketamine as a rapid-acting antidepressant, but certainly as the most widespread excitatory neurotransmitters, it's involved in most everything, and then it's also involved in this sort of reinforcement. So just a few diagrams from the Netter atlas here, that just showing the widespread distribution of these kind of ascending monoaminergic, or acetylcholine is not a monoamine, but it also has widespread distribution. But the monoamines like dopamine arising from the brainstem nuclei, and serotonin from the RAF-A and the nuclei, equally having overlapping. I guess the main point of these pictures is that there's a lot of overlap in terms of the distribution of these transmitters, and norepinephrine as well, or as the British would say, noradrenaline. And that they do have these interactions, and this is, you know, really take this with a grain of salt. So they're not, there's not a point-to-point correspondence of this is connected to that, is connected to that. There are a variety of different projections going to these various areas, and this is just a way of conceptualizing it. But in terms of having the ventral striatum, the nucleus accumbens being quite important in terms of reinforcing effects of drugs, but then other areas like classic cognitive areas like the hippocampus are also involved, and there's feedback. You can't see the whole feedback loop here, but the habenula, this is epithalamic structure, is key in terms of feedback from the telencephalon and diencephalon to the back to the brainstem, and controlling these ascending projections. What used to be called as the ascending reticular activating system. In any case, and prefrontal cortex is involved too. And here it doesn't show in here, but the dorsal striatum is involved, especially this idea of the migration of the locus of control of behavior from the ventral to the dorsal striatum that Robinson and others have talked about, and the amygdala in terms of the emotional component of this, and the hypothalamus, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. about the involvement of appetitive centers. And certainly that sort of natural, hardwired, so to speak, innate control of consummatory behavior can be co-opted in the service of addiction to drugs. And you can see here this diagram of this person who is taking a cigarette and inhaling it, but having a kind of a hand-to-mouth sort of activity as a consummatory behavior. You would think, oh yeah, maybe consummatory areas of the brain like the hypothalamus may be involved, and also in terms of the hypothalamus being involved in stress response, the HPA axis. But in any case, not only are these variety of neural systems involved, but there are also different reasons why people smoke, and people, even the same person may smoke for different reasons at different times of the day. And certainly there's a rewarding effect of nicotine, nicotine being the primary psychoactive, but not the only psychoactive ingredient in tobacco. But anybody who's been a tobacco smoker, it's not like you get incredible rush from it. It's a modest sort of reward. It actually makes other things more rewarding and more reinforcing. And that actually comes into this second line here, the secondary cue reinforcement. So the smell of the tobacco, the act of taking in a cigarette hand to mouth, the sight of a cigarette package. These secondary cues can come to be quite reinforcing. Nicotine does have a cognitive improving effect. There are actually a variety of studies going on in terms of nicotine skin patches as a possible treatment for things like Alzheimer's disease, still under investigation, but there are some promising results there. There's certainly a habit to it, and people used to say, oh, is it a habit or an addiction? Well, it's both. There's habitual parts of an addiction. Nicotine is really very well demonstrated to be an appetite suppressant, probably involving the hypothalamus, as we talked, and anxiolytic, alleviating stress, and having pain relieving effects. And then if someone is a heavy smoker, that they do show a withdrawal effect. Now, people are by and large less and less heavy smokers because one of the great advances in public health in recent decades has been restrictions of smoking. And so as more and more places are non-smoking, then that has really not only decreased the number of people who smoke, but decreased the amount of smoking that goes on, even people who continue to smoke. So whenever I got started in the field, people who smoked a pack or two or three a day wasn't too uncommon, but just practically speaking, I mean, unless you're sitting in your own home all day, which I guess happens more now than the last couple of years, but you can't really smoke in a lot of places, so people tend to smoke fewer cigarettes. So that these different behavioral effects involve different neural systems, and that the developing treatments might involve different pathways, and that they might differentially improve efficacy for different subgroups. So here's the sort of model that I've been working with for years here with a rat self-administering nicotine IV. Why IV? Because it provides kind of a rapid bolus of nicotine, like if you're inhaling it, not quite as rapidly as inhaling it, but rats being obligate nose breathers tend to find smoke to be very stressful and stress-inducing. And so that it's not easy to control the dose, and it's not very attractive for the rat to do that. So this has kind of gotten to be the model, even though people don't abuse nicotine IV. This is a good model system, and I'll show you some validation that we found and other people found. And then here it is. So nicotine skin patches, which provide a zero order kinetic flat distribution of nicotine over the course of a day. We can model that with implantation of osmotic mini pumps that similarly would provide a zero order kinetic flat continuous infusion of nicotine. And what we found, nicotine skin patches do help people quit smoking. I mean, they're not a cure-all, but they significantly help people do that. And then here we saw, is the weeks of exposure or of access to the nicotine, and see that animals that are not getting nicotine replacement tend to increase their nicotine consumption up to an asymptote. And then if they're getting chronic nicotine, tend to decrease it. So that's one form of validation, something that works for people, works in this model as well. And then two other drugs that work for people are varenicline and bupropion. Both having nicotinic actions, although bupropion also has effects in terms of being a monoaminergic reuptake inhibitor, and actually being an antidepressant under the name Wellbutrin, but under the name Zyban, the identical molecule, is marketed for smoking cessation. And so here we can see a significant decrease in nicotine self-administration with both of these, and some interaction of the a combination of the two. But again, a validation that two drugs that are effective at decreasing smoking rates also decrease nicotine self-administration in this model. So onto the drug studies that we've done. So this is quite a famous compound in terms of being a kind of go-to D1 dopamine antagonist, is sharing 23390. It has other effects, as all drugs have a variety of effects, but its predominant effect is to antagonize or block and dopamine D1 receptors. And here we saw a significant decline in nicotine self-administration with acute administration of the D1 antagonists. And then here we saw a decrease with chronic infusion into the insular cortex. So the insula is this kind of association cortex, which is involved with a lot of condition reinforcing effects. And here here's a summary on the right-hand side showing a significant decline with the infusion of this D1 antagonist there. And then that's Eunice Kapu did that study, and then Brandon Hall did this other series of studies where he looked at D1 infusions into various parts of the brain to try to understand which part of the circuits, parts of the circuits were involved, and several different parts, not only the insular cortex, but the nucleus accumbens shell, which is, you would think, would be a central area for that, significant reduction with low flow infusion, but also the parietal association cortex, which is not normally thought to be a area involved in drug reinforcement, but it actually is important in terms of motivated behavior. So I think this area needs to receive further study in terms of drug abuse. And a little hint of an effect, but really not a significant effect in the anterior cingulate cortex. We thought there would be a bigger effect there, but well, that's why we do the studies, to find out. And then interestingly enough, in the hypothalamus, we saw some effects. So normally you would think that dopamine innervation of the hypothalamus might not be that important in drug abuse, but again, both because of the hypothalamic importance in consummatory behavior and also stress-related behavior. We should look more seriously at the hypothalamus. Now, with lacaserin, lacaserin is marketed as a drug, or was marketed. It was taken off the market recently, but as a drug to combat morbid obesity, and it actually does decrease food consumption and helps people shed weight. Although people need to continue to use it for it to be effective, and once they stop taking it, they do gain the weight back. But the fact is, maybe it has effects on other sort of motivated behavior other than compulsive eating. So what we did was to look at the effects. And these are actually fairly low doses compared to what affects food consumption, and saw that these doses that don't really affect food consumption that much do significantly decrease nicotine self-administration. Other people found it decreases cocaine self-administration as well. And then not only acutely, but chronically here, we did it over a period of 10 sessions and saw no diminution of the effect at a fairly low dose. And then local infusions that we again looked in a couple of thalamic nuclei, the supramammillary nucleus and the lateral hypothalamus, and saw some hints of effects. Now, it's interesting that there are some diverse effects. So depending on whether there's a lower or higher, these are the low baseline group, and there's the higher baseline group, the darker bars, and that the lower baseline group that have a significant decrease with this infusion in the supramammillary nucleus, but actually those show some signs of increasing in the lateral hypothalamus, but the higher dose, the higher baseline group shows some sign of decreasing. So it's not a real dramatic effect, but it's and it's a complicated effect. So as usual, we say further research is necessary, but it does show that these hypothalamic nuclei are important. Pyrrolamine. So pyrrolamine is an H1 histamine receptor type 1 antagonist. It's actually widely used as a relief of nasal congestion with allergies, but it does penetrate the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain. And at doses that are moderate, I'm not going to say they're real low, but moderate and not causing sedative effects, which are usually the main central effect people talk about with antihistamines, that there is an attenuation of nicotine self-administration. I should go back and just mention the axis here. The infusions per session, nicotine is only weekly reinforcing. So the number of infusions, these are hour-long sessions, is on the low side, and then that's what people have found in this line of work consistently. So in any case, and then this is just a difference between the baseline and the treatment with chronic administration. Here, compared to controls, there's a significant reduction over a period of time with pyrrolamine repeated injections. And then this is the resumption after a week of enforced abstinence. Idazoxin is a noradrenergic or norepinephrine antagonist, alpha-2 subtype. And there, not everything decreases nicotine self-administration. Here you had an increase in nicotine self-administration. So this is just an isolated study we had. We did an acute administration. We need to follow it up during chronic, because we've seen with some other drugs that acutely increase it, that chronically would decrease it. So further work is needed, but some drugs like caffeine, I'm not going to show the data here, but we found that caffeine significantly increases nicotine self-administration as well. So now to the kind of the meat of the talk, what the promise of the title was in terms of combination. So how can we take these data with single drugs and see if combinations of drugs might add to the effects of having chronic nicotine, or basically can you add things to the nicotine skin patch to improve its efficacy? So here we did a study with Shearing 23390 and Brian De Palma was Brandon De Palma had a key role in this as a senior honors thesis, looking at the interactions of the D1 antagonists and chronic nicotine. And here you see these different panels showing either the single drug treatments or the combination of the two. So that we had the A typical design we've used for many studies, 1 week or 2 weeks of access after baseline training. And here with the controls, they increased their responding, and even after a week of enforced abstinence or continued self-administration. And then we added this other part where we stopped treatments. Certainly with the controls, there was no stop because they never got it, but that they maintained their levels of self-administration. And then in replicating the earlier effects, we saw that the D1 antagonists significantly decreased nicotine self-administration compared to the controls. And but then after you stopped giving the treatment, there was a rebound, increased self-administration in these animals, so that they were not significantly different from the controls. And a similar thing with chronic nicotine, given via osmotic mini pump, that there was a loss of efficacy with after the pumps were removed. And then I think there's a, let's see if I can get rid of this sidebar here, that you would have the combination of the two, that there was a significantly greater effect and nearly down to zero with the combination of the two. And it did bounce back after withdrawal of treatment, but was still significantly reduced compared to the control, even after the end of treatment. Because you don't want to have to treat people for a super long time. You'd like to treat them and then have them come off the treatment and still be abstinent. Anyway, so here, let's see. Let me, lorcaserin and nicotine. So here we're looking at a similar design, actually the same design, with this a couple of weeks of access after baseline training and a week of enforced abstinence, and then resumption, and then after the end of treatment. Again, the controls they only got vehicle the whole time, and then they rose to an asymptote and a steady level of nicotine self-administration. And lorcaserin, showing a significant decrease in nicotine self-administration. Again, it's a weaker effect than the D1 antagonist, but a significant effect nonetheless. And then nicotine alone also causing a decrease during this resumption period, but the combination causing a more pervasive effect in terms of an effect that would start earlier and then continue, and then even after the end of drug administration being significantly lower than the controls. And pyrrollamine, again, this is a kind of a different sort of design. We didn't have that post-treatment. We actually did the study before the others. But again, showing replicating the effect of a decrease with pyrrollamine alone, a decrease with nicotine alone, and a greater decrease persistent effect with pyrrollamine plus nicotine. So that these sort of treatments do add to nicotine's effects. Now, in terms of multiple treatments, what if you had a multiple treatment in one drug? So we did some work with amitifidine, which is a triple reuptake inhibitor. So you can have inhibitors of reuptake of serotonin, of dopamine, of norepinephrine, or like with this drug, having it do all three. And here's just the picture of the drug diagram. And here we saw that it significantly reduced nicotine self-administration, even at doses like the 10 milligram per kilogram dose that didn't affect locomotor activity or the consumption of food. And here's a demonstration of that in terms of not having the effects on food consumption. And then this is just a breakdown over 15-minute blocks. And then this is locomotor activity, showing that it did significantly reduce locomotor activity. So chronic amitifidine had a very nice persistent effect starting from the get-go. First 5 sessions, sessions 6 through 10, after this enforced abstinent period, continued effect. So it actually was a very nice drug in that regard. And then this is just a breakdown session by session, very robust and persistent effect. And then here we looked at it, again, you recognize this sort of treatment, the design, where we had this post-abstinent period where you saw that amitriptyline was quite effective even after with the resumption, but after the cessation of the treatment, they bounced right back up to control-like levels. And then chronic nicotine, as we've seen before, has some modest effect. Here, with the combination of the two, so this triple monoaminergic reuptake inhibitor plus nicotine caused a very robust effect, which again, there was some indication of increase in self-administration after withdrawal of both of these drugs, but there was still significantly less than controls, even though both of these groups were not receiving any drug at the time of testing. And then this is just the day-by-day data. So wanted to say it's not just for nicotine, that amitriptyline, we tested the effects on remifentanil, which is an opiate, rapidly acting opiate in the fentanyl category. It's a good drug for looking at in experimental models because it's has a rapid onset and a rapid offset. So the animals don't get overly sedated from being intoxicated with this opiate, but it does have the full reinforcing value. And then here, well, look at this difference. We were talking about like 5 to 10, or if we're lucky, nicotine self-administrations per hour session. Here, 30 to 50. Here, this is phase 1, phase 2. So we did this repeated testing of these different doses of remifentanil, 5, 10, 20 milligrams per kilogram in a counterbalanced order one time, and then again a second time. And so that's what phase 1 and phase 2 are. So as time goes on, with the zero or the vehicle injection, they're self-administering a whole lot of remifentanil, but it's significantly reduced by these doses of the amitriptyline. So it's not just nicotine, it's this drug as well. And then this is looking at chronic effects week by week in terms of there is a continued effect. Chronically, it is the low and the high baseline group, more effective in the low, but then you see some signs of effect in the higher dose or higher baseline group. So these animals sort themselves out in terms of, some like it, like remifentanil more than others, but you see the effects of the amitriptyline. And then this is the session by session data. And then it's important in terms of looking at other effects of the drugs, because opiates are used therapeutically to relieve pain. So if you had a treatment that would attenuate the reinforcing effects of an opiate, that might be great. But if it's also going to attenuate the pain relieving effects, the antinociceptive effects, then that's not going to help you out in terms of people who are in severe back pain or severe cancer pain and other things where they need the opiate to relieve the pain. So we did this hot plate test of nociception and found that there was no significant reduction in the pain relief caused by the remifentanil. So here are the doses of amitriptyline and remifentanil. These are minutes after the injection of the drug. So here you can see a very substantial effect of the remifentanil, and maintain that to the maximum, 30 seconds, even when amitriptyline was given together with it. Amitriptyline itself cause a much smaller but significant antinociceptive effect. And then the 10 minutes after the injection, 15, 20 minutes, there's a diminution of the effectiveness of the remifentanil. I said it's a rapidly acting and rapidly inactivated opiate. And so you can see that documented here quite nicely. But here you see, actually, if anything, there's a prolongation of the effect of the opiate with the co-administration of remifentanil. So anyway, so this is good news that it doesn't attenuate and actually may prolong the effect of the antinociceptive effect of opiates. So in summary, as in humans, the nicotine and chronic nicotine, varenicline and bupropion administrations in rats significantly reduces nicotine self-administration in this IV self-administration model. So this is a model that was actually originated by Victor Noble and Paul Mealy and really brought home and fully developed by Bill Corrigal and his co-workers, and is widely used in the field now in terms of a good rat model of nicotine reinforcement and for testing drugs that might be useful to develop to help people quit smoking. So things that are effective in people are effective in this model. We found that by itself, D1 antagonists, and actually we did a whole series of studies with haloperidol, and we saw no hint of an effect of haloperidol even at the limits of solubility in terms of infusing it locally into these brain areas in terms of reducing nicotine self-administration. And so it really does seem to be a D1 effect. Serotonin actions, this 5-HT2C agonist, lacasterin, this drug that inhibits appetite at higher doses, at low doses decreases nicotine self-administration. And then histamine antagonist, pyrolamine, also causes a decrease. And then having a kind of a combined monoaminergic effect with amitifidine significantly reduces nicotine. But importantly, the chronic effects or the interactive effects of chronic nicotine and these drugs, they do show some mutually potentiating effects. So this is kind of the first cut in terms of just looking overall, but we would like to look further. So we did some mechanistic work in terms of local infusions that they D1 but not D2 antagonists have effects in the insula and the parietal association to cortex and the accumbens to decrease nicotine self-administration. And also both the 5-HT2C and the dopamine antagonists cause a D1 antagonist cause effects in the hypothalamus. So those both deserve follow-up. But what I'd like to do in the future is to look at the different behaviors in terms of, for example, the primary and even secondary reinforcing effects of nicotine maybe being attenuated by dopamine antagonists, D1 antagonists. But the involvement in terms of appetitive-like responding being more involved with serotonergic effects. And I didn't show the data, but we've also found some hypothalamic effects in the histamine actions too. And so the idea is that certain people may smoke for different reasons, and if it's the effects on appetite that people are seeking, that maybe lacasterin might be good co-treatment. If it's effects on just the primary secondary reinforcing effects, the dopaminergic effects might be important, and so forth. And so that we would like to look at the different behavioral models in terms of these different aspects of nicotine effect in terms of cognition and appetite and emotion. So just to kind of wind up again, getting back to MAPS, it's not the Mississippi River does not start in the Little Lake in northern Minnesota and travel down to its output into the sea in the Gulf of Mexico. But rather, there's a whole system of rivers that flow into this. And rather than just the lines of the rivers, there's whole catchment areas that are involved in. And even further, it's not just the downflow of the river going to the sea, but the cycle of, by analogy, of the evaporation from the sea going up and raining and snowing upstream and providing a cycle. So like that analogy, that these so-called circuits, or more complex than circuits, are really these systems that are interacting, and they're complex systems that are complicated to figure out, but provide us with important insights and possibilities for a variety of different sort of treatments, and that there may be some treatments that are better for some people and other treatments better for other people. And again, just finishing up with a map about our own ignorance and hubris, is that 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and landed over in here. Not to mention that many millennia earlier, people trekked over from Asia this way and not only discovered but fully colonized North and South America. And I recently learned there may be people came over by sea from Africa and the South Pacific for South America. Who knew? But in any case, 150 years after Columbus came, this European view of North America was fairly good on the East Coast. Maybe Florida was a little wider than it is, or maybe it was wider than, I don't know. But the fact is that they had terra incognita that they knew they didn't know, and then they had terra miscognita that they thought they knew, but this is not an ion channel. It's a cul-de-sac. So in any case, just to remind us that we need to be intellectually humble and know what we don't know and recognize that there's plenty more to find out. And that's it. And so now I'm going to stop sharing, and I spoke fairly quickly. So I think we have some time for discussion if anyone has any questions. Jed Rose.
Hi, thanks for that wonderful tour, Ed, tour through the brain and tour through the pharmacopoeia, and even tour down the Mississippi, all in one. A lot of very interesting findings, and really impressed by the magnitude of that D1 antagonist nicotine replacement combination suppressing self-administration. But two questions. One, I think, sort of general one is in the paradigm which you developed, which is really nice, looking at the resumption of self-administration after a treatment is ended. I think you pretty much always saw some degree of resumption, but it didn't get to the baseline level. The question would be, I think it's an important question, if you carry that out long enough, would the animals eventually regress to their original level? Because what we see in the human situation is that, after short-term pharmacotherapy, even with our most effective agents like varenicline, Chantix, et cetera, once the treatment stops, almost all smokers go back to smoking. And that, which has caused me to now do research in the switching paradigm, that is getting people to switch to less harmful nicotine replacement methods, whether it's e-cigarettes or other non-combustible sources, and use pharmacologic treatments that are traditionally used to help people quit smoking as a bridge to get people onto long-term replacement. But that, again, it's predicated on the assumption that if you don't give someone a long-term substitute, they are going to go back to smoking in 9 out of 10 cases. So I would just highlight that as a real area of a very important question that needs to be answered, is do those animals eventually go back the way people do seem to go back after short-term treatment, and what treatments can be continued indefinitely, because it looks like smokers do need some sort of indefinitely long support, or they're going to go back to cigarettes That's the general question. If there's time, there's a specific one I'll come back to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, just to answer the general question, I think that's very important, and we do need to follow it out further. And I would think that they would tend to retreat back to their previous levels, like people do. And there's a certain self-selection. I mean, people who are smoking, I mean, it's easy just to say, oh, they're addicted, and that's that. But there's also a variety of reasons why they would smoke, and if it's for stress alleviation or appetite suppression or cognitive enhancement, they may be seeking out those effects and be missing those effects, having quit. And I think your work also with pre-quit treatment is important too, because it's not just alleviating withdrawal effects, and maybe even less so now that people are smoking fewer cigarettes per day, but the experience of having maybe attenuated reinforcing effects of cigarettes under some pharmacotherapy might help a longer term quit go on. But I agree. I mean, having decreased risk is really the key.
Well, and in that regard, we just finished and writing up the study we finished at Duke, where we gave people a combination of nicotine patches and e-cigarettes, and the patches were either placebo or nicotine patches, and the e-cigarettes either had nicotine or not, in a 2x2 design. What we found was that the inhaled nicotine greatly suppressed their ongoing cigarette smoking. The patch had almost no effect. Nicotine from the patch had almost no effect. And Neil Benowitz found the same thing, and we found the same thing, that a standard dose of patch, if people are already smoking at some rate, does almost nothing to suppress their smoking. It'll help people, some people quit smoking if they're totally abstinent, but if they're engaged in the behavior of smoking, there's almost no effect until you give 2 and 3 patches simultaneously. So it'd be another thing interesting. Sometime we should talk about the data in your study where you gave the nicotine infusions and suppressed the nicotine self-administration in the animals, because in terms of how much nicotine did you have to administer to suppress a certain number of self-administrations, because again, in humans, you've got to give a lot of nicotine to start suppressing it. It'd be interesting to compare that sometime.
Yeah, that would be a great thing to look at. Yeah, great. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
Ed, can I ask you about sex differences? I know you think about these things, and
Oh, I
particularly
do.
for nicotine, the data are.
Yeah, and so I forgot to mention the great majority of these studies were done in female rats. The reason that we do that is a lot of them are chronic studies, and they are much more tractable in terms of having a steady adult weight without really having onerous food restriction. We have looked at sex differences. We haven't seen, we actually, Amir and I published an article a few years ago on sex differences, and we tried a variety of these different treatments that we found to be effective in males and females, and did not see substantive differences in their responsivity. Although people have found sex differences in humans. I mean, Jed could probably speak to that better than I can in terms of
particularly the reinstatement. I really like that part of the model too. And that would be the nice place to look for those sex differences, right?
It would. So I just wanted to emphasize that we didn't do a classic reinstatement. The reason why I termed it resumption was that we did not have an extinction phase, because deliberately so, because we had unless somebody starts smoking dummy cigarettes without nicotine, they don't really go through an extinction. They stop. And the last cigarette they had was a powerful cigarette with nicotine in it, and then they have enforced abstinence, whether it's self-enforced or enforced by others, keeping them from the cigarettes. But basically, we had an enforced abstinence where we did not give the rats access to nicotine, and that then we had a resumption. After you've had the willpower to not smoke for a week, then suddenly you're walking down the street and do you go into the convenience store and buy a pack or not, yeah.
I guess I had one other just quick question, and that was more for Dr. Rose too, which is, what about chewing gum? how effective is that compared to a patch, which has nothing to do with your mouth, and e-cigarettes, which has to do with your mouth? And then has anybody tried to model that kind of thing as a treatment paradigm for rats?
Well, just in terms of the human clinical data, and I'll let Ed talk about the modeling, which I think is very important. So data show that nicotine gum, nicotine patch, nicotine lozenge are all about the same efficacy, which means basically, they'll increase success rates from, in the short run, from 10% to maybe 20%. And then in the long run, you're down to like, 10 or 15%, right? E-cigarettes have been shown, at least in one trial that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of years ago, to be more efficacious than even combination NRT. And combination NRT is patch plus gum or patch plus lozenge, which has been shown to be better than just patch alone, to give a constant background of nicotine and then a on-demand source of nicotine to deal with crises that crop up. But e-cigarettes were more effective than that. And so e-cigarettes have just been dumped on with almost a Donald Trumpian like misinformation campaign in terms of pointing out every imagined problem without recognizing that they're probably the most promising development to help adult smokers to reduce their health risks and quit that we've had in decades. And of course, the issue has been teenage use, which is bad and should be discouraged. But that problem has been greatly exaggerated, at the expense of adult lives.
And the latest data I saw is that there's some peaking out and modest decline in terms of vaping among students in school. What's continuing to increase is cannabis. As that's gotten to be more widely accepted. So, but yeah, I agree. Getting rid of the hazard is really prominent among all these. In terms of the consummatory behavior, we have done some work, although it's fairly tricky in terms of having a consummatory aspect to it. Like I said, that as the obligate nose breathers, rats don't in any way prefer to inhale smoke, but you can have them engage in a consummatory action of licking to get IV nicotine. And yeah, on the face of it, you think, oh, well, then that would be a very convenient way to do these studies. In reality, it's much more difficult than originally anticipated. So we've done some work with that, to not great results, but there are some other people who've done more of it. So that would be a way to look at that, those consummatory actions. So any other questions, comments?
Just one more point on that oral is that actually in the paper we're writing up based on this patch e-cigarette combination study is that we found that the e-cigarettes that had zero nicotine e-liquid in them, which did give oral behavior and puffing, did virtually nothing to suppress cigarette smoking. So if it didn't have the nicotine, which not only has the internal pharmacologic effects, but gives a very distinctive throat hit that smokers really identify as an immediate signal for satisfaction. If you don't get that, then you don't really seem to see much behavioral substitution for combustible cigarettes. That was kind of a surprise because we thought, well, maybe just the oral substitution would do something, but they're looking for that, tracheal hit.
Yeah, and that's the work you did years ago in terms of the groundbreaking work of the secondary reinforcing effects of the throat scratch. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's getting towards 1. Now I just wanted to share my screen one more time with to remind people to make sure you come back. October 6th, we're going to switch the conversation to alcohol, and Dr. Katie Healy from Duke is going to be talking about the long hangover, persistent neurobiologic and behavioral effects of adolescent and intermittent ethanol. And then just a couple weeks after that, Dr. Amir Razvani, professor in the psychiatry department here at Duke, is going to talk about his experience communicating information to undergraduates and about drug abuse and how that works. And then on through the semester with the D.K. Lee lecture and these joint lectures or seminars with the C-START folks. And again, if anyone has any suggestions for the seminar series for the spring of 2023, and please let me know at levin@duke.edu. I'll be glad to I always like to have help putting together these things. And if you want to give a talk, or if you know of someone who would be giving a great talk, please let me know. Okay, well, thanks a lot and have a great rest of your day. And I'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.